Well, hey there, you're on the internet and my life's kind of crazy right now. And welcome to the Triple N Network, where all you newbie nib nerds can find all the news you'll need. Let's look at an ink today, shall we? Now, today's ink I have in sample form, but it was actually given to me by pretty much the only fountain pen person I have outside of the internets. And it's one of the recent anniversary inks from Diamine, and it is Carnival. It's their red color. And for the longest time I thought it was called Cardinal. So yeah, very bright, intense red. Let's get into it. Now, the two pens I used were these, because apparently I wanted to match. Now, this is a Parker Vector with a fine nib, and as you might be able to tell, because you can't see the light through the tines, generally this pen is fairly dry. It's like a 4.5 out of 10. And this is a JinHao X450, and I love my X450s because they tend to be pretty broad and pretty wet, and this one is. Alright, now, so when I was going through my ink samples to see if I could find some comparables, I actually found a lot. I think it was like 9, and I narrowed it down. But yeah, here's Carnival right here. And here's Diamine Crimson, which is very similar. I'd say maybe there's a little more pink in Crimson, just a bit, maybe. Diamine Ruby Red, which is very similar. I'd say maybe a bit lighter, maybe a tiny bit less saturated. KWZ of Poland's Cherry, but I thought sort of the darker parts of this are kind of like the lighter parts through here. And another KWZ ink, Red No. 1. Again, I sort of felt like parts of this were similar to parts of this, but yeah. So, there are your comparables. Now, let's check out the chromatography. Excuse the bandages, it's a long story. But yeah, so here's the chromatography as it's meant to be done, where you put the line of ink and then instantly drop it in the water. And as you might be able to see, you can tell where that initial drop was. And then there's sort of this haziness that goes up, and sort of a pinkish, and then there are almost hints of orange right up at the top. But just a little bit. But yeah, as you can tell, not a ton of water resistance. But there's a lot of stuff in there. Now here's where I let it dry, which is not how you're supposed to do it, but it's something I do for my own curiosity. And I feel like it's shown some interesting things about ink's performance that you probably, I don't know, I feel like it reveals some stuff. As you might be able to tell, the dot is a little bit darker, but that's kind of about it. It's mostly the same thing. Now, I wanted to see what this ink could sort of stand up against, and the answer is actually not much, but I think people forget that when ink is very water-soluble, pretty much across the board, it also means it's pretty easy to clean out of your pens, which is nice because this ink is very saturated, as you can probably tell. Very good saturation on this ink. Water really broke it up. A little bit left, but mostly gone. 1/3 bleach solution, interestingly, didn't move most of it. You can see right here in this pattern, where the heaviest parts were, it just sort of turned it this muddy orange. Ammonia pen flush really got it moving, but honestly water did just fine. And hydrogen peroxide kind of got everything moving, but it also started to like eat through the page, so... For the record, I never recommend cleaning your pens with hydrogen peroxide. That's a forgery test for fun. Now, on to the paper test. Top down to density, Clairefontaine 90 grams per square meter. Bring this in close so you can get a good look. And yes, I am ridiculously caffeinated right now. Alright. Yeah. Oh, that's just beautiful. I mean, this isn't like a rouge hematite thing, you know, where there's just like particulates all through it. It's just, this is a very, very saturated ink. There's a lot of ink in this ink, which means that when you lay it on thick, on good paper, it'll sort of pile up on itself and get shiny. And I actually really like this contrast, this like intense red with the gold. It's a nice combo. But as both these smears and these dry times, probably reveal, first of all, you can see just how heavily saturated that is. I mean, look at the swipe. That is some dense color. And again, look at the size of that swipe in the Vector, which is generally a fairly dry writing nib. So Yeah, it is wet flowing. I'd say it's a 7 out of 10 or maybe a 6.5 out of 10. Later I say it's 6.5, but it's somewhere in there. It was really flying out of both these pens. So that fairly broad and wet JinHao, yeah, you're gonna have some long dry times, but you have this wonderful rich color. I really enjoy the color. I like this kind of red, and you get this nice sheen. Yeah, it's fairly well behaved. There's no bleed, no feather, no spread, none of that nonsense. But again, like most Diamine inks, it's not terribly water resistant. But that does mean it's very easy to clean out of your pens. And it was. This ink was perfectly easy to clean out of my pens with just water. Didn't need anything fancy. But yeah, if you spill water on that, it's not going to be the easiest thing to recover. As you can tell, the stuff with the X450 put more ink down, so more remains. Next up is Fabriano Eco Qua. It's a totally chlorine-free, environmentally friendly, yada yada, 85 gram per square meter. Now, again, yeah, see, look at all that sheen. And I like how around the really, really wettest parts you get this halo effect, which is this outline. And you get it in the words too, it's just harder to see on that scale. See? Maybe, I hope. And again, I mean, look at this. Yeah, you're going to get long dry times because wet flow and heavy saturation together, that's just something that's going to happen. But this paper handled it really well. But again, that generally dry writing fine, granted it's a European fine, but still, look at all that color. It's a dense color. That's a swipe. That's 1, 2, 3, 4. So I'm holding the pen, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's that quick. And yeah. So the fine took 17 seconds. That fairly broad and wet JinHao took 25. But again, fairly well behaved. You know, it's very well behaved. No bleed, no feather, no spread. I don't think there's any echo. I said maybe there is in the scrubby, but that was me laying it on very thick, trying to get some sheen, just to make sure I could get it on camera. Of course, I would have done it anyway, because just look at the writing down here. You get a halo of sheen around these wettest areas down here. Maybe it won't show up on camera, but trust me, in person you can see it. And again, water test, not perfect. In fact, it's pretty not water resistant, but again, that X450 puts down more ink, so more remains. And again, it's easy to clean out of your pens. With heavily saturated inks, that's not always easy, but this water did just fine. Now, here's Rhodia, 80 grams per square meter. And here we still get sheen. We don't get quite as much, but it is there. Here it's mostly hazier. In the X450 we do get a little bit of a halo around certain parts, but yeah. And yeah, that heavy saturation again. Look, oh god, that went right off the page. Yeah, the fine vector took 16 seconds. The fairly broad and wet JinHao took 25. Could be worse. Here's where I said it might be a 6.5, but honestly, it could be a 7. I mean, it feels like a 7 sometimes, but yeah. Anyways, and again, we get sheen. Look right there, into the eye. You see that? And we get an outline in the writing as well, but yeah, again, water test, not great. That would not be easy to recover. It's pretty gone. Again, the X450 still leaves some stuff, but very well behaved. You know, no bleed, no feather, no spread, no echo, no sheen. Now, next up is Tomoe River paper, which is known for drawing out shading and sheen and dry times and echo because it's such a thin paper. Honestly, if you've never felt this stuff before, it's hard to explain. If you're really old, like I am, and you remember fax machines, especially the ones where you had to like load the roll of paper, it has that texture. You know, it's shiny, it's freakishly smooth. But anyways, this paper definitely did what it generally does. It drew out a lot of shading. I hope this will show up. See the shading? So if you like shading, it's definitely got that. And you also get a much more intense halo effect in the writing, just color-wise. But then, of course, with the sheen as well. I mean, here almost everything glows if you catch it at the right angle. But yeah, this paper, because of the way it's designed, it really doesn't, I mean, it's extremely rare for it ever to feather or bleed. So it didn't do any of that, but since it's so thin, where you lay it on really heavy, you can see through the back just because it's so darn thin. So if you're very sensitive to it and you love broad and wet pens, this might be a bit of a problem because this is sort of like a darker straight red, you know, not a dark red like a maroon, but yeah. Yeah, this paper draws out dry times, and with a wet and heavily saturated ink, it got epic. I mean, yes, it's a European fine, but it took 26 seconds to dry. That X450, I knew it was going to be a while over 30, and I usually don't count over 30 seconds, so I don't know. But just look at the size of that smear. That's pretty bad. But yeah, very well behaved, you know, no bleed, no feather, no spread. There is some echo, there's lots of sheen. And this paper loves to let ink slide away when you add more water. And the thing is, I was expecting it to be much worse. Yes, that fine is pretty much all gone. But you get like half of everything with the X450, and that's more than I was expecting. And dyed the page a little bit, but I was expecting it to dye it much worse. Now for the next 3 tests, I only used the X450 to write the name, but the remainder of the test was only done with that fine vector. So here is pretty much the world's worst 20-pound copier paper. This stuff is awful. It's garbage. So chances are you have something at least a step up from this, but still, let's call this worst case scenario. Now here's the size of the writing from that vector on a paper where there was no spread. You see how much broader that line got? I mean, look, that's the X450, and this is the fine on a more absorbent paper. It's an intense change. So yeah, it spread a lot on here, but again, this is the worst paper you could probably ever encounter. So yeah, there's no shading on here. Because the paper's more absorbent, it soaked in right away. There is some feathering, like if you look at the bottom of the P and spread. But see, it's really not that much. Honestly, I was expecting something much, much worse considering the amount of spread. But honestly, that's not bad feathering-wise. I mean, you get a couple of spots, but even that, like the bottom of the R in Carnival, yeah, it could have been a lot worse. Now, there's very little near bleed, no full bleed, except in tiny, tiny spots, but that's with the X450. So if you're being reasonable, it's really not so bad. That, I put this down in the... So when I did the water test, it left water on the table when I lifted it up, and then I put it back down. So that's what that is. That's water. That's not... Yeah, anyways. You have some spots where it nearly gets through, but you see how it's never very dark? So it didn't come all the way through, which is actually kind of nice. So there's that, but yeah, this water test. Now, more absorbent papers tend to draw the ink in, make it harder to fully wash out, but then we get things like this where it can kind of feather and explode and become quite hard to read. So, not the easiest thing in the world to recover. Now here's Mead Notebook Paper. This is the kind of stuff that you'll get in a spiral notebook. Not the kind you'd find in like a lab notebook. That stuff has more of a newsprint texture. But lately this stuff has been feathering like crazy, which it kind of continued here. So, I mean, I feel like that is something that this paper does lately. But yeah, dry times 2.5 seconds. And if we compare with the Tomoe River and this, you see that there's much less spread comparatively. So not nearly as much spread. This paper has been feathering, but there's no bleed. None. I mean, not even with the X450. Maybe the dot in Carnival, but that's so hazy that I don't think it came all the way through. So it behaved very well in that regard. Again, this paper is very thin. It's more thin than 20-pound copier paper. So you do see some stuff through it, but it's not because it's nearly to the other side. So that's nice. Now this paper does tend to freak out when you add water, and that's definitely what it did here. It exploded. That looks like some kind of furry cactus monster in some spots, but I mean, I don't know, maybe you could recover it. Depends on how motivated you are, I guess. Now, lastly is Moleskine notebook paper, which I hate because it's utter garbage. you can see the pulp that this paper is made out of in this scrubby, which is just gross. It took 4.5 seconds to dry. We have some very nasty feathering. We have a very gross texture going on here. It's not great. And then we have several. What's weird is we have lots of tiny dots where it actually got all the way through. It actually got onto the page below. And that's kind of weird because it's literally just spots. But yeah, I hate this paper. It's awful. But this paper seriously freaks out when you add water, and it definitely did here. I mean, it feathered, it exploded, it half washed away, half didn't, totally dyed the page, it started to wrinkle in on itself. Not good, not fun to recover even remotely. Yeah, so there you go. There's Diamine's 150th anniversary Carnival Red. Again, I almost said cardinal. But yeah, it's a very intense red. It's a true red. You know, it really doesn't lean pink or orange. It's a very straight red. And yet it's, you know, it's a solid color. It's well saturated. You get this fantastic contrast of this rich red with this gold sheen. And then you get lovely shading, like just in the writing. Like even on the nicer papers, you can see some nice shading. You get a nice halo effect. It is a bit wet. So if you're going to use it on cheaper papers, something to be aware of. If you're impatient, something to be aware of, because saturation, wet flow, long dry times. So yeah. Anyways, there you go for your consideration from the Triple N Network. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you'd like to see more, please subscribe to the channel. And thanks for watching. Bye.